Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hellacious Hero Returns. This is CinemAsian episode 8. We're going to be talking about the movie Hero with Sanimation05. What's up, Sanne?
Hello, the ceiling.
Yes. But before we dive into the movie, guys, I want to say CinemAsian streams with Sanne and I are structured. We really delve deep into the source material and want to give you guys the best opportunity possible. So, don't be offended if maybe you're interested in stuff and you send us stuff and we're kind of like, hey, what's up? Sometimes we're just trying to get this stuff out of the way because we are kind of devoted to it. We spend a lot of time researching it and bouncing stuff off of each other for like a week ahead of time. So we're trying to give you guys the most concentrated experience possible about our opinions and our viewpoints on it because we're really passionate about this stuff. So please don't be offended. But with that aside,
There's always a but.
let's talk about Hero. Sanne, tell me the first time you saw Hero. What did you think of it? I know you posted something a little earlier on IG about some of your favorite scenes and the actresses involved. So talk to me about that.
Oh, let me turn up the volume because, of course, I want to hear my own voice clearly because I'm self-obsessed. Basically, what Joe was saying that we will not really have, like, in no offensive way, like guests like that on the show because there's been some fuck ups before and. I saw this movie about more than, I guess, 10 years ago. The last time I watched it was maybe about like 8 years ago. I still watched it with my mom. That was the last time. But when you mentioned it, I did remember bits and pieces because I do remember like Donnie Yen and the drops falling. And I was like, but I can't remember the rest really. And then I was watching it and all these scenes like, aha. And on Instagram, I posted my favorite scene. So yeah, this movie is like storytelling on the next level. Even with, just the traditional music and everything just, I don't know, makes sense. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, the first time I saw this movie actually was probably like, I think I was maybe like a year out of high school. I graduated in 2004, and I think I saw it when it came out on like DVD or Blu-ray. I think it was just DVD back then. Blu-ray wasn't around. And I think I rented it from a local movie shop. It was kind of funny because there was a movie place right beside this Chinese restaurant I used to go to. So I would go get Chinese and go get like kung fu movies. So it was kind of cool.
I'm in the mood.
Yeah, I was like, I'm in the Chinese mood, but like we talked about on previous streams and stuff, I've always loved the culture and stuff like that. So it was like a really frequent thing for me to go get Chinese and rent kung fu movies because that's what I did when I was a kid and even when I was older, So, but yeah, I always loved it. Like I said, when I was a kid, I think Lethal Weapon 4 came out, and I think that was like maybe 6 or 7 years before this movie even came out. And that was the first time I saw Jet Li. So obviously after that, I became like hooked on Jet Li because I was like, first it was Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, and those guys, and then later it was like Chow Yun Fat and Jet Li. So that was kind of like my introduction to the movie. But I remember watching it and I was just like blown away. I was like, this movie is amazing. And really, like I told you before in like the Enter the Dragon stream and previous streams, like, again, martial arts was a huge influence for me, and it was one of the reasons why I gravitated towards it because Jet Li was a huge martial artist and inspiration for me. And watching it, it kind of, I said this before, like the history there, like the history of China is so diverse, and you and I've talked about this, like how they have such like thousands and thousands of years of like this really rich history. And I love how this story starts out like it takes place. It gives you like a backstory of where China was at the time. Like it's the Warring States period with like the 7 different, places, and there's 7 different regions that are kind of like warring with each other. And then what is it? Can and Zhao have like they're the ones who are like right now the upper hand. And really in real Chinese history, the Zhao dynasty was actually in control at this time. And then it doesn't really explain it in the movie, sort of, but the Zhao dynasty is kind of like in control. And then the Qin dynasty, like the guy who the king is, like, is trying to get assassinated by Jet Li's character, that dynasty is actually trying to push out all the rest of these other dynastic places and like the warring states, like he said in the movie, to like create this one unified China. Like our land is the, you know what I mean? Like the whole motto of it. But it's actually a real thing that happened. Like it was actually real. Like the Qin dynasty and the Zhao dynasty were really really did compete with each other. And the funny thing is, I don't know if you know this, Sana, but I studied this in college. The Qin dynasty, the king who later becomes the emperor, that dynasty only lasted for 15 years. That was it. And then after
Oh,
that, yeah, after that, the Han dynasty took over. And Han was actually one of the warring states that initially got conquered by the Qin dynasty. And then they ended up reclaiming their territory, and they ended up taking over and becoming an empire that lasted for over 400 years. They have a really long dynastic thing. But the Qin dynasty really put in motion all the imperial guidelines and regulations for thousands of years to come. And get this, the guidelines that the Qin dynasty created, even though they only lasted for 15 years, all that stuff they created for the empire and stuff, the structure, the imperial regime, all that kind of stuff, lasted all the way up until the Chinese Revolution in 1911 AD, like a little over 100 years ago. Isn't that crazy? I mean, that's some pretty deep shit, you know? It's awesome. So, yeah, that's
it's
what.
been a while since I dove into Chinese history books, so I kind of forget all of. Well, I know some dynasties, but there's some dynasties also that I'm really interested in, but I can't name them off the top of my head.
Nah, it's cool. Like that's the beauty of these streams where like you're reintroducing each other to stuff. But
yeah, I feel like ripping out my history book now. China. I have this one small book, like the history of China told in a short way, because I bought it like to really look into it and be like, oh, I'm interested in that. I want to dive into that more. And I want to dive into that more. Da, 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 da. So I probably end up with a big fucking library sooner or later.
that's what you need. Libraries are great.
Yes.
Yeah, but anyway, guys, the whole synopsis of the movie, like I say this all the time, but to kind of to summarize it here in a nutshell is Jet Li is this nameless guy in the beginning of the movie. It's during the Warring States period, so these 7 different sections of China are fighting against each other. But right now, the Qin region has the upper hand, and they're kind of like have the biggest army, and they're trying to conquer all the other 6 areas of China to unite, like I said, as one people. But Jet Li's character in the beginning, he gets summoned to visit the king because he explains, he like narrates parts of it, and he says that he has done this insurmountable deed, or these insurmountable deeds that no one's ever done before. So the king summons him to witness what actually happened, and as the story unfolds, he basically conquers several of like these assassins who are trying to assassinate the king. And what he does is he gets entrance into the king's kingdom, and they start having like this discourse with one another. And meanwhile, like that's the basic foundation of the story. It's like the king is talking to Jet Li's character, whose name is Nameless. He doesn't have a name. He's an orphan who doesn't have a name. And then the story unfolds in a bunch of different perspectives and ways. Like Jet Li tells it one way, then the king thinks he's lying, and then he says a version of it, and then there's another version when Jet Li admits like a truer version of the story. It's really cool, but it's the same story told like over and over again, but like 3 or 4 different ways. So it has a really cool artistic and unique approach of retelling the same kind of thing in a different way, which is really cool. I mean, I loved how that happened. So
Yeah.
But what do you think about, you know, Jet Li's version of the story? Is there any in particular version you like the best? Was you think Jet Li's original version where he was kind of like, I don't know, just kind of like buttering up the king, so to speak, in a way to make him seem like he's this great dude was the best way? Or do you think the king finding out and being like, no, this is actually how it happened? Or do you think the other version at the very end is the best version? Like what was your favorite telling of the story?
Well, it's kind of hard to pick one because when he comes in and he tells his first story, it's basically he wants to kill the king. And slowly, as they go against each other with, no, it probably went like this, but it actually went kind of like that. And then the truth comes out. You see the whole person changing their perspective. Like, to me, the person that really stood out was the broken sword. I thought he is probably the most interesting person of this entire movie, in my opinion, because it's probably near the end, but when the king finds out what the three words were that he was talking about. But yeah, in the beginning, the first story that's being told is probably the oldest story in the book. It's about love, it's about cheating, it's about this, it's about that, all these emotions coming in, and people can't think straight, therefore they lose focus, therefore shit probably happens and the story is sold. But this king is like, I found out something that you were already friends with. I think it was Donnie Yen's character.
Yes. Long Sky. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
but
huge cast, guys.
everything is just
It is.
amazing. The whole
There's
cinematography and the
it's
colors and the
amazing.
music.
It's amazing. There's three assassins. Basically, what happens is the story is telling is how Jet Li conquers these assassins. There's three big assassins. One's played by Donnie Yen. He's the first guy. His character name is Long Sky. He uses a silver spear as his fighting weapon. And the exaggerated scene, so to speak, that Jet Li tells at the beginning is in this like chess house where they're playing like chess with each other, and this like old man's playing music and rain's coming down. There's fountains everywhere, and it's like a really beautiful scene. It's one of my favorite scenes. Like the whole movie's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking about my favorite scene now, and I'm like, the whole movie's my favorite scene. The way that Jet Li tells that story at the beginning is beautifully choreographed. It's really cool. And the way that Jet Li vanquishes Donnie Yen's character with the silver spirit, it's a really amazing scene before Jet Li even gets there. Because basically, Jet Li is working for the Qin Empire in this story that he tells as like this prefect. He's kind of like watching over parts of the land. He's like a sort of like an officer of the law. If there's a criminal or somebody out that has a bounty or they're a wanted assassin, he has to bring the person to justice and so on and so forth, arrest them, so to speak. So all these Qin soldiers approach Donnie Yen's character in the chess house, and they're like, "You're under arrest." And some of the choreography with his spear and shit is insane. Like he doesn't even take the sheath off the spear. He's like beating him with the stick without the sheath.
Yeah, and the
yeah,
bending swords, like he is that powerful.
He's that powerful that his staff like literally bends their swords in these weird shapes and shit. Then after that scene, Jet Li's like, wait, because Donnie Yen's trying to leave the house after he fights all these soldiers, and Donnie Yen turns around. He's like, "Oh shit!" And Jet Li like runs towards him and charges at him with the sword. Then they have this like epic fight. It's beautifully choreographed. It's just a beautiful scene, and this water's splashing up, and Jet Li finally vanquishes him by like going through the water in like a slow-mo scene, and then cutting his spear in half, and then it shows him like kind of stabbing him, and it's like, "Oh shit, he killed him!" And then the spear drops to the ground, and he picks it up, but then the king doesn't believe these stories that Jet Li's telling, and he's like, "No, I know exactly. Here's how it happened." And then it's like a retelling of the same story, but in a different way, where basically Donnie Yen let Jet Li kill him, because the only way that these assassins could die, so to speak, and the only way that Jet Li's character could get as close to the king as possible to execute this move, where he had to be 10 paces away from the king, because these assassins tried to kill the king before. And what he did was he removed like all the stuff inside of his quarters so it was wide open so nobody could hide. And nobody was allowed to come within 100 paces of the king or they'd be killed. So he's basically sitting in his palace and there's like nobody around because nobody's allowed 100 paces around him. So like it's this big, gigantic Chinese palace, and like all of his soldiers are outside, just like in front of the palace and behind the palace and all around the palace, like making sure nobody gets in. Nobody's allowed 100 paces, but he had one like law that if you were to vanquish these assassins, the closer you could come to the king, because he's like, "You're doing me a favor here. You're killing these assassins for me, so I owe you my respect, and you can come drink with me and talk to me even closer." So when he first shows up, he presents the king with Long Sky's spear. And he's like, "Oh, you can go. The law of Qin is you can go within 20 paces of the king, and you get this much gold, and you can have this many households or whatever." So he gets within 20 paces of him, and then he presents the king with. There's a character called Snow, and then a character like Sanne was saying called Broken Sword. He presents the king with their weapons, like he vanquished them and killed them, and then he gets within 10 paces, which is where the king then starts to piece stuff together after he tells these stories of you got within 10 paces of me to execute some move you've been practicing for 10 years to kill me instantly. But that's kind of how the story unfolds. But oh my god, so many beautiful scenes. Like after Long Sky, the way he tells the story with Snow and Broken Sword is he goes to this calligraphy school and it's like beautifully shot in like this red tinted color. Like Jet Li's wearing a red OB. All the characters are wearing red OBs. There's red sand. They're in this calligraphy school, like writing in red sand. And he shows up and he basically asks Broken Sword to write him the character Sword in calligraphy.
The 20th character.
Yeah, the 20th character, because there's apparently 19 ways to write it, but Jet Li's character Nameless wants to see the 20th way because he believes that if Broken Sword writes this character the 20th way, it will unlock his mastery of the sword, and it will unlock his technique with the sword, and Jet Li's character will understand how to basically defeat him if he understands his methodology behind his fighting style with the sword. But really you'll find out later in the movie if you watch it, that's kind of a ruse. That's not really what happens. The real reason why he wanted him to write the 20th character was for the king to understand what it meant. And the king kind of like deciphers it later and figures out what it actually means. And what it actually means is it wasn't really about a sword. It was about like Broken Sword's life's philosophy. And it's funny because the character's name, Broken Sword, really describes in a nutshell what the character's about. You know, like you can't fight with a broken sword, so to speak. Like your sword has to be sharp if you're always going to war and fight. So his character, you think at the beginning in the fictionalized version of the story that he's like this badass, he wants to kill people and stuff and defend Zhao, the kingdom that's basically in opposition to the Qin kingdom. But what you really later come to understand is when the king tells his story and then Jet Li reveals like a truer version of the story, a purer version of the story, that Broken Sword actually wants peace for everybody. And he actually had an attempt to kill the king like 3 years prior, but didn't take it because he doesn't. Basically, what he's saying is more bloodshed doesn't resolve anything. If you keep using the sword to fight people and kill people, more people are going to die and nothing's going to happen. You just have to unify the land, unify China. There shouldn't be warring states anymore. And it's really a critique on the whole period itself. Like, it's called the Warring States period in China. In history books, it's called the Warring States period. So it's kind of cool how Broken Sword's character no longer wants the states to be at war and wants everything unified. So in essence, he agrees with the king, who so many people don't really like. And the king even says in the movie, he's like, finally, he's like, out of everybody that I've quarreled with and had bouts with, he's like an assassin. Talking about
my worst enemy.
Yeah, my enemy is the only person who truly understands what I'm trying to do for this country. It was really cool. It's a really beautiful movie, like the way the stuff's fleshed out, things happen, but it's amazing. I mean, the entire movie is one big, really emotional roller coaster and one big fight scene roller coaster. It's some of the fight scenes and the choreography are just mind blowing. Yeah.
Top notch, including with all the cinematography that's happening around it.
Absolutely.
Like there's not a lot in every scene. Yeah. Like with the first fight scene between Jet Li and Donnie Yen, it's what I really like personally is when, you know, like Jet Li tries to tell it like he was the badass, like, old man, play one more song, like as if it was going to be the swan song for Sky. And just, you know, the singing that you hear in the background is basically like fighting noises, but the intensity of like, it's just like listening to a song in a foreign language that you don't know. You can usually hear by the tone and everything, if it's a happy song, if it's a sad song or an aggressive song, and you could really hear it there. It was a very intense fight, and that's what I really liked about it, especially, you know, the traditional music. And with the calligraphy fight, I just like how they focus on color, so there's not a lot going on, so you're really focused also on the characters and just on everything. That's I have to say that every stream you mentioned the 4 elements, And now I slowly
You see
start
it.
to
You
see
see
it
it now, right?
myself. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like I was, oh,
exactly.
there's a lot of wind, and oh, it's this, oh, it's that, and the water. Oh, this is what Joel refers to every time. So, thanks. But yeah, I really like it, especially the scene between the snow and moon that I posted also on Instagram. That is just such a beautiful
It is.
scene.
Yeah, one of my favorite scenes too. Another thing, Sonic, is I like how you mentioned the scene about him, like Jet Li's character, kind of like being the badass and paying the old man to play one more song. And a line that I love, and it really reflects the whole movie too, is he says, "Martial arts is like music. It's complex chords and rhythms that you kind of have to intertwine and work out to get like a style down or even a song down." And it's funny too because I don't know if you guys know or not, but I play music too. Like I play guitar, I sing, I play bass. So
That's it.
it's true. I mean, like, and I was a martial artist too, so it really is the same kind of thing. It's a lot of memorization, a lot of technique memorization, a lot of, like I said, perfect practice makes perfect. It's a lot of practicing the right way and doing things the right way, and it really, really reflects that. And another thing about it is, as a historian myself too, this movie, the way it's told from 3 or 4 different perspectives, is really a showcase on how mythology, tales, and stories can get changed from person to person to person to person. Because if you really think about it, the character Nameless is like each of us. Like we're the ones sitting there telling the story to the king. And the way we tell it, sometimes people inflate their opinions of themselves a little bit. And that's kind of initially how it was at the beginning. And the king is kind of like bringing him back down to this human level. Like, hey, look, I understand what you're doing here, but you're not that great. This is really what happened. This
Mm.
is the way I see it. And then Jet Li's like, yeah, you're kind of right, but it kind of actually happened like this. I left a little part out that was kind of like this. It really wasn't just me. I am great, but I'm not as great as I intended in the first place. It was actually Broken Sword and Snow and Moon and Sky helping me out too. It wasn't just me. So then you get like a real truer version of that whole idea when he writes the stuff in the sand outside in the desert that says our land. It's actually, you know, 4 people coming together to assassinate this guy who's actually trying to do the same thing. So in essence, the whole assassination attempt cancels out because at the end, Jet Li's character realizes I'm doing the exact same thing he's doing. I just work with 3 people who I never would have known before, who we just happened to cross paths, who were out for the same goal. And then he's sitting there talking to the king, and like you said, he starts to kind of Jet Li's character in his head starts to kind of realize, like, oh shit, like I kind of understand what Broken Sword's trying to do here. I kind of understand what the King's trying to do here. And if the King can sit here and look at this piece of calligraphy that says sword and understand it, then he's not as evil as a person as everybody thinks. Like he actually is trying to unify people. It's unfortunate that, you know, it's not perfect, but he's trying at least.
Yeah, it also really shows that revenge will make you bitter, because that really is being shown with the character Snow, because she just gets more and more aggressive. She will even kill the love of her life just because she wants her revenge. And it's nice to see that, because Jet Li's character could be like become like her. Well, he was technically like her, but
It
then
will.
he understood what Broken Sword was saying. Well, whereas Snow needed more conviction,
Yes.
resulting into death.
Yes. Absolutely. That's a really good point, Sana, because one of the characters who really doesn't change throughout the different versions of the story. The way the events happen are different, but Snow's character throughout most of the story is pretty much the same kind of character. Um, Obviously, in the exaggerated version, she kills Moon because in that version, what happens is this is when everything's red, guys. Like, this is the exaggerated version that Jet Li tells. At first, he says, because the king asked, well, how did you manage to dispose of these 2 amazing assassins, Snow and Broken Sword, simultaneously? And he's like, I didn't. He's like, he tells the story originally that Snow was actually in a relationship with Sky. And that pissed Broken Sword off because what happens is, in this exaggerated version of the story, Jet Li's character Nameless brings his spear. And he gives it to them, and he's talking to them, and then Snow takes it in her quarters and like puts a piece of this, like a piece of Sky's broken spear that must have fallen off in a previous encounter with the two of them on the spear, and like Broken Sword's like peering through her like room door, and he's like, they were in a relationship, and he feels betrayed. So he basically goes and has sex with his pupil Moon and makes sure that Snow can see it. And she gets all pissed off, and in a fit of rage, he's like going into his quarters, and he tells her, he's like, I wanted you to see it. She like stabs him through the door and kills him. That's the exaggerated version. And then later, she kind of does like similar stuff, but it's in a different way. Like, it's not as brutal or mean or angry as the other two versions of the stuff were. So, but it's her character never really changes that much. But the end scene, I will say that, like when she actually does when she kills herself because he doesn't, that was a beautiful scene. I was like, man, that's sad, man.
Yeah.
That's love right there, baby.
Because he said something. Let me look it up. Hold on.
No, take your time.
He says like, because her dream was always because she was the daughter of the general of Zhao. Is that how you say it?
One of them, yeah, she was. I think, like, yeah.
Yeah. So she always wanted revenge for what happened to that.
To the people. Yeah, no, to the people of Zhao. You're right, to the people of Zhao, because Qin was trying to, like I said, in order to unify the empire, they had to basically inculcate Zhao by eliminating Zhao. And Zhao was their like main competition. So what happened was Qin tried to wipe out Zhao from being like this military power, and that they ended up killing a bunch of people, and that pissed off Snow's character because her dad was a general. It never says like whether her dad died or not in this confrontation, but you can kind of glean a little bit and assume that he did because she's using her dad's sword to fight. So you can kind of think that like these people killed my father, you know. So it's kind of like a revenge thing, like Sanne said.
Yeah, and you know when you lose everything, you start to romanticize everything from the past, how everything was always better, and it's almost like she was a cancer. But she but she was like, you know, I really want to show you my home, you know, meaning this city, whatever that got destroyed.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, he believed her, and therefore her revenge was becoming stronger and stronger because she really just she was losing her mind. And then when he says like, I always wanted to go home with you, sadly it won't happen now, take good care of yourself, and that basically was just, you know, a slap in her face. And she was like, you know, like, but why didn't you defend yourself? And it's like, bitch, did you fucking get it?
Why didn't you block my attack? Why did you attack him in the first place? You killed him.
Yeah.
But that's, yeah, you're right. That's the whole point. Like, that whole point is she was kind of, that's a really good observation, Sana, because when Broken Sword wasn't standing up for her and her ideology of killing the king, because he said, I don't want to kill the king. Revenge, like Sana said, isn't my thing.
Mm.
She kind of then turned on him and saw him in that light sort of as an enemy. So she was kind of taking her revenge and her ideal of revenge, instead of out on the king, she was taking it on Broken Sword, because she figured in that light a lens went over her eyes where Broken Sword has now become an enemy. And I'm going to kill him, or try to kill him. But the funny thing about it is, the irony is, she loved him, but one part of her was Zhao, where she saw him as a Qin sympathizer. But the other part of her was my love. So she's fighting him because she knows he's strong. She knows that he could easily parry her attack. But like I said, he has now become a man of his name, Broken Sword, a man of peace and not a man of war. So he just smiles and pulls out his sword, and when she comes close to stab him, he kind of just drops his sword, like turns it and just drops it. And she stabs him
With
right.
a smile that is
Yeah,
like,
he smiles
wow.
too. He's like, now you finally understand what I meant, and I do love you. So, like, in order to show his love for her, he lets that idea of himself die, so to speak. The idea of being a traitor, the idea of fighting all the time. And then she, in turn, realizes that finally. But in order for her to realize it, because she still has that piece in her heart of him, she has to kill herself. So she wraps herself behind his body, and then there's a sword stuck inside Broken Sword's stomach she stabs him with, and then she basically drives the sword all the way through him into her, and then she lays there and collapses on top of him. And then Moon comes up over the hill and sees them like laying there dead, and she's like, ah, screaming. But the way
In
it's shot,
every story, she was always the loyal student. And just a little side note, what I also like was when they were all dressed in white. This was the last story, like the true story, when Snow, yeah, Snow, when Snow is like asking Jet Li's character, like, Broken Sword has to die, but you have to help me with it. And he only jumps through it because what I like what he says before, like he just stands there and she's like, why are you not helping me? And he's like, to attack someone from behind is dishonorable. And once again, the whole honor thing comes up, and I was like, go to Tsushima.
Yes, absolutely. And then you find out later too that this guy, Nameless, who Jet Li plays, I think it's really cool. The director of this, Zhang Yimou, I believe is his name. Zhang Yimou. The thing that's really cool about Jet Li's character is, and bringing up that idea of honor and stuff, is Jet Li was a Zhao citizen. However, after Qin came over and conquered the territory and pretty much wiped out a lot of the people who were Zhao, a Qin family adopted Nameless, Jet Li's character, in the movie, and they raised him. But as they raised him, he started to realize that he was originally from Zhao, and figured out how his family came to get like caught up in all the warring stuff. And so what he started to do was train with a sword for over 10 years to hone his skills. But I think that's a really cool character development with Jet Li's character, because I love that his name is Nameless, because he's neither Zhao or Qin. He's both, because he was raised by a Qin family but born to a Zhao family. So in essence, he's the embodiment of the unification itself between the two kingdoms, right? You really don't. And I think it's really cool how it unfolds, because he kind of, like we mentioned earlier, kind of goes in and out of the different mindsets. Like where Snow is pure Zhao mindset initially, and Broken Sword is pure Zhao mindset initially, but he kind of completely removes himself from the Zhao thing and wants peace for everything. Whereas Snow stays with the Zhao, and then Jet Li's kind of like undecided at first. He's kind of like, I'm Zhao, I need to assassinate this guy. Then he slowly starts to develop like, hey, look, I'm for this Qin guy. If he's going to unify the country and it's our land, as Broken Sword said, maybe I shouldn't assassinate him. And that's
like a mind fight, like the few times in the movie, fighting with your mind.
Exactly. And that whole scene at the end is the biggest mind fight of the entire movie, because the scene is he gets within 10 paces, and the king knows that he's pretty much going to die if Jet Li were to do something, because all his guards are outside. Jet Li's within 10 paces of him. If Jet Li tried to kill them, he would kill him before the guards ever got there. So the king says, well, how are you going to kill me without a sword? And Jet Li's like, I've been practicing the skill where I can just take your sword to kill you with it. So the king just throws the sword to Jet Li, and it lands on a table, and he's like, oh, go ahead. He's like, there's really nothing I can do. I accept my fate. So Jet Li picks it up, goes to land the attack, and then it looks like he stabs him the way it's shot. And like the king's like standing there like, and then Jet Li says, remember what a dead man said about unifying the country and making it our land. And then it shows, it zooms down on Jet Li, and it's like the hilt is going into his scabbard, not the blade. Yeah.
Remember?
Remember.
I bet that. Oh god.
Remember, Sean. Hey, man, what's up? Hey, son, I'm going to the chat. Wait.
Hey, Sean.
Yeah. Louis, what's up,
And
brother?
thanks for all the compliments, Sean, for that you like and enjoy CinemAsian. Louis.
Yeah, what's up, brother?
Jeff. Sup?
Gabby, how are you?
Gabby.
Thanks for hopping on,
Woo.
guys. We appreciate it. Yeah. But yeah, son, I mean, you're right. That whole mental battle and that struggle, some of the most beautiful scenes in the entire movie. I love the water scene where they're fighting each
Yeah.
other in the him and Broken Sword are fighting each other after the the second made up version of the story happens, or the king's story, or whatever it is, where
Basically, like the funeral of
yeah,
Snow.
Snow's in the thing, and him and him and Jet Li, Broken Sword and Jet Li are having like a tribute fight in her honor and her memory, and they keep like dipping their swords in the water and fighting and walking on the water and fighting each other. And the scene where like Jet Li comes up to stab Broken Sword, and that water drop bounces off of his sword, and it goes and flies. Like he splits the water bubble up, and a piece of the water goes and lands on Snow's like cheek, and he turns around, and he's like, "Oh!" and he jumps over, and he goes and starts wiping the water bead off of her face, and then Jet Li does the execution move and go stab him, and he stops, and then turns around and just like vanishes. That was a really cool scene.
That, but like the water drop was almost like now she isn't pure anymore. And then when Jet
Exactly.
Li basically goes falls with his entire face in the water, it's like you're not pure. And that's when he just walks away. And the same
Absolutely.
thing also with the drop was with the fight between the two queens of Hong Kong cinema, Maggie and what's her name?
I think it's like
Uh,
Zia, isn't it?
yeah, when she also gets stabbed, and then you see the sword in the tree, and then you see the blood, and the one drop is falling. That's like it's done. She's gone with the wind, literally.
Absolutely. Like you guys seriously have to check this movie out, because sitting here doing the stream, I honestly didn't think it was going to be this difficult to describe the different stories, but it actually kind of is to sit back and think about it. Because even in my head right now, I'm thinking about all the different stories, and they're getting like twisted in my head. Like I don't know which one's the Jet Li and which one's the King. But that's the point of it, because the director wants to make you feel like you're nameless. He wants to make you like try to sympathize with Zhao and Kin at the same time, and then like you're struggling in your head. Like even right now, I can't really think what side I should choose, because and the whole point of that is we're all on the same side. You don't have to choose a side.
It's
You
relatable.
have to unify. Like that's the whole beauty of it. And the movie's so beautiful. Like the scene that someone was talking about is it's in like the fall. There's like orange leaves with, and Lady Snow's wearing this red OB, and Moon is wearing a red OB because this is the exaggerated version. And basically, Moon is pissed off because in this version, this is the version where Snow killed Broken Sword out of anger because he had sex with Moon. So Moon's like, "You killed my master," and she comes with these swords, and they have this beautiful fight scene. And I mean, this just forest with these beautiful orange leaf trees, and there's wind blowing everywhere, and the way that that's shot, and like how Snow just kind of like drifts through the air, like she's not even trying, like it's not even like she's just, Moon, you have no idea how powerful I am. Kind of like this really sarcastic, like I said, inflated version of herself, much like Jet Li's character. And that's a hint that this is the inflated version of the story. All the characters have an inflated opinion of themselves. Broken Sword's kind of like really like douchey. He has his hair down over his face, and he's like this arrogant like guy. And Lady Snow's kind of like this really mean lady in this whole thing. Like the Moon comes to her initially and says, "I need red ink to write the sword thing," and she's like, "Tell Broken Sword to come get it himself." And she like throws water at Moon and hits her in the face, and she's like, "Ah!" And like she's a really overinflated version of herself. Moon is really overinflated in this version. Broken Sword's overinflated, and Snow is overinflated, and so is Jet Li's character. Then there's like a light blue palette where it's more a mix between the truth and the fictitious version, where they're all still kind of cocky with each other, but they're still just a tad bit overinflated. And this is the version that the king is telling back to Jet Li about how he feels like the events happen. And then they're all wearing white obies and everything's really bright. And like Sanne said, Sanne and I were talking before the stream, that color, Sanne mentioned this, is like the closest to the realest version there is. It's the most pure firm. And that's actually in the movie, that's the purest color they use to describe, like, this is probably the closest thing to the truth. This is the closest version of the story to be told, the more factual version. So I think that's really cool, you know, how they really showcase that. Another thing,
was also beautiful with the leaf scene when her blood drops, that all the leaves turn red.
Red. I loved it. That was a beautiful moment too.
Yeah.
Sorry
for interrupting you.
No, you're fine. No, that's perfect. I'm glad you brought it up because it was a really cool scene. All the colors you mentioned earlier, even before the stream, and what I just mentioned with the different stories they used to tell different versions of the story using different colors was really neat. And then Broken Sword tells his version of invading the palace 3 years prior to assassinate the king, and it's like a green scene, and they're wearing green obies. Him and Snow are wearing green obies, and they're invading the palace, and the palace has all these green curtains. And Sanne mentioned to me earlier this, and I said the exact same thing. The king is trying to find Broken Sword within these curtains because he's wearing a green obi, so he's kind of blending in. It reminded both of us of Enter the Dragon, where Bruce Lee is trying to find Han's character in the Gallery of Mirrors. It's just really similar to that fight scene. Also, a historical thing I wanted to note with that scene where they're invading the palace. If you watch that scene when Snow and Broken Sword are walking into the palace, they're really easily cutting through all the spears and all the shields. Like, they're literally slashing the shields, and there's shields flying everywhere, like hundreds of them. Hundreds of spears, hundreds of shields. The soldiers are fighting with are getting cut in half. And that's actually a really, really, really important thing because that's actually historical. During this time period, really, when the Han Dynasty took over in ancient China, the Han Dynasty developed a lot of really influential technology. When the soldiers and stuff use the crossbow, or they don't use a crossbow, excuse me, they use a regular bow in the movie to shoot the arrows. That was actually the technology at the time. It wasn't until the Han Dynasty where they started actually using crossbows. And a lot of soldiers in this time, their swords were actually really blunt objects. They weren't like the fine-tuned katanas that we know from like feudal Japan that had like different composites of metals and stuff that made them really, really sharp and really, really deadly. The stuff that they used back then wasn't as strong. Most of it was made of bronze and then later iron. So when you see these guys cutting through the shields of these soldiers, that's because the shields are made of leather and bamboo. That's the kind of stuff that they had back then because they couldn't mass produce bronze shields or iron shields just yet. That happened like 50 or 100 years later where they started doing that. So it's really historically accurate. Like, so when you see like the two assassins breaking into the kingdom and literally cutting through shields, it's because that's actually probably what happened in a real fight. Like, a bamboo shield isn't going to hold up to a blunt, even if it's a blunt sword. It's not going to hold up to that. But an iron shield would later on, right? But they didn't have that technology yet. So it's kind of really, really historically accurate. And even the armor and stuff they wear, the king is wearing leather armor because they didn't have iron or bronze armor yet. It didn't come till later. They used to wear, actually, even before that, when the Zhao dynasty was like the big province that had most control of the country, they would wear tiger pelts and stuff for armor. But obviously, a tiger pelt isn't going to stop an arrow from a bow, right? So they had to develop better techniques. So if you guys ever see like the terracotta soldier statues and stuff like that with the leather armor and then a little bit of iron on it, that's kind of like around this time. That's like when the Han dynasty and stuff is starting to rise to power. So it's a really cool historical thing to see, like, the director actually incorporate that in the movie, like where they're actually going into the palace and cutting through bamboo shields because you actually could do that back then with a sword because the stuff just wasn't resilient. It's pretty neat.
I just took a note of it because I have to dive into this.
Yeah. It's cool stuff.
Nerd alert.
Yeah.
For me personally, what I really love, because, you know, I study Japanese, and with Japanese you have the kanji, which are the Chinese characters of the writing system. I of course love the calligraphy part the most because how they all are practicing, and as you said, perfect practice makes perfect. It's
Hmm.
true. How annoying it is also because you constantly have to rewrite everything, going over and over and over and over and over again, and also that the old man when they all get these arrows shot in there, how the old man is like, we should represent our culture. Go, like go back to your seat and continue what we're good at, what we're doing. And what I really love is that scene where Broken Sword really comes up with the kanji or Chinese character for sword, the 20th version. And he just, because I love doing it myself, brushes. So when he really gets that paper and gets this huge ass brush with the red paint and it goes, but he really does it in such an exaggerated way. I love it because he does the same near the end when he's wearing white, when he goes in the sand when he wears where he writes the three characters all under heaven. Like it's like the movement is like, I wish I could write calligraphy like that because I'm more like.
Yeah, that's cool because actually in my version it didn't say all under heaven. My version was only two characters and that said our land. Is that what yours said? Like seriously, all under heaven?
Yeah, mine said all under heaven.
Yeah, mine was a completely different version. It must be like English versus like the European version because he only wrote two characters in the translation that I saw, and it was our land, like OURLAND. But if you think about that, that's awesome. Like all under heaven, our land, like we're all the same. Our
Mm.
land is under heaven. Like it's really cool. That's a different translation. Because I was wondering, because earlier you said three characters, and I was like, yeah, I think it's only two, but maybe she. But you know what? That's awesome. That's
Yeah,
super cool. Because I
just wait
never
to
saw that
find my
version.
DVD. Maybe I'll have another version.
No, that's really cool though. I like personally, I like All Under Heaven better. I think it sounds more badass, but I think the Arlan thing too is cool because like I mentioned, historically, this dynasty united all of China and created the first empire. Our
It
land,
almost
our
is like the
empire, all under heaven,
American
right?
song,
What's that?
right? It's almost like that American song, like "This land is your land, this land is my land." I
From
don't know what the
California
song. I don't know
to
what
the
the song
New
is
York.
called.
I forget
This
what it's
land
called.
was made for you and me, or whatever.
I can't remember the name of it. I'm horrible at this stuff. Simple stuff like that, I can't
Oh,
remember. But complex stuff, I'm
I'm
like, oh yeah.
I'm horrible in general, so don't worry about it.
Stop it, no.
やめてください。
But uh, yeah, this is a really badass movie. So many actors in it too. We didn't even touch on that yet. Donnie Yen and his whole repertoire of Chinese movies, and he's like legendary now. I mean, like he's in Star Wars Rogue One, and I mentioned this before, is Chirrut Imwe, like a really badass character. And it's funny because in that movie he uses a staff too, just like he uses in this movie, and probably a ton more. Um, the guy who plays Broken Sword, Tony Leung, I think is his name. He
I showed the DVD box yesterday, right?
yes,
Where Police Assassin is it?
yes, he's in Grandmaster, that movie. Sanne and I, he talked about that. We talked about that yesterday. He plays It Man.
Mm.
He's in uh Infernal Affairs, that movie that Departed was made of. He's
The John
actually,
Woo movie.
yeah, Hard Boiled. He's in the John Woo movie Hard Boiled, and he's going to be playing the Mandarin in the MCU when that Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings or whatever comes out. He's going to be Tony Leung. So that's, yeah, really cool.
Cool.
And then obviously, you mentioned what's Snow's actual name in real life?
Maggie Chung or something.
Maggie Chung. She played in
Police Story.
Police Story. Yeah, she played in 3 Police Story movies with Jackie Chan. And then Zia, I can't remember her last name. She played in Rush Hour 2 with Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker. She played
Memoirs of a
in
Geisha.
Memoirs of a Geisha. She played in House of Flying Daggers, another movie by the same director who directed this. And she played in the Grandmaster movie too with Tony Leung. Remember?
Eh.
Like, the cast in this movie they're really, really into the whole like kung fu, Chinese history, what's this called, wuxia genre of film. So yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing movie.
Hair.
It's one of my favorite Jackie Chan. One of my favorite Jet Li movies. So
Oh yeah.
it probably might be my favorite actually now that I rewatched it again because I really love Fearless, that movie. Once Upon a Time in China is amazing.
Look it up.
But yeah,
I have to look at
this
his movies because I have his movies on DVD, but I don't have them near. They're all in the storage somewhere. Because I know there was one movie that was so fucking cool. I
mhm.
probably cannot even find it what the name is, but is it Baby Fist of Legend then? Is that a Chinese movie?
Yeah, Fist of Legend. That's what Donnie Yen, isn't it?
From 1994. Yeah, Fist of Legend. I like that one. But of course, this one is, it has, I look at it differently now. Because I remember at the time that I was watching it for the first time, I was kind of like, um, how to say, like resistant into accepting movies like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Hero because I was like, yeah, flying in the air, blah blah blah. I wasn't ready for it then because I was more like I want to see like fucking badass fighting shit like Sammo Hung versus Donnie Yen, that type of stuff. But now I appreciate it on a whole different level. And the color schemes, as I told you before in this, the stream started, like I wish I was more. I investigated the color pattern meaning more before we started the stream, but
No, I mean it's really a cool observation though that you said that in your mind, or you like you said the color patterns and stuff, and with the elements because like even Jet Li's character for the majority of the movie when he's talking to the king, he's wearing like an all black obi. And obviously, if you think of like Japanese culture, I know this is Chinese technically, and he's an assassin, but think of like a ninja. Compare it to a ninja. Like most ninjas wear all black. Why? So they can't be seen as an assassin. That's kind of like that. That's why he's wearing the all black garb because he doesn't want to be seen. But also, it's a reflection of his character. Like he's nameless. He doesn't have a name. He's not really seen or heard. Like you don't really know who he is. And I think that's a really cool reflection of using that color black to depict the fact that he's like just an assassin.
soul is dark.
Yeah. But the thing that's great about it too is like at the end when basically like I mentioned earlier when he goes to kill the king he doesn't go through with it and kind of just puts the hilt into the scabbard and then drops the sword and leaves. As he's leaving, they surround him and the king is having like second thoughts because everybody's like his court comes and they're like execute him, execute him, execute him. He tried to assassinate you.
Chanting.
Yeah, they're like chanting execute him, execute him. And he's like having second thoughts, the king, like his eyes twitching. He's like, I don't know if I want to do it. But then they say a line, and they're like, in order to unify the country and the kingdom and the nation, you must execute him to make him an example. And then he's like, shit, I have to. Then he gives
Yeah,
him
but
the
also
order.
because the Broken Sword agrees with
Yeah.
his point of view, so he knows that if he doesn't do it, people will get skeptical.
Exactly. That he's not a good leader, that he's not going to be able to do it. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I think the character of Jet Li, he didn't want to live anyways because, he accepted everything for what it is, but his life doesn't have a meaning, anymore because he trained for this for 10 years. He doesn't know any better, so why would he accept his own quote-unquote failure?
But also the fact of the matter is he gets executed as an assassin and then he gets a funeral as a hero because it, I see what you're saying about like his whole life not having meaning or anything, but I think what he realized was, and there's even like a line in the movie where it was like one person's struggles and hardships don't mean anything compared to the country and the number of people who will be saved because of the unification. So in the grand scheme of things, he was like, I'm really not that big of a deal. If my death is going to help unify this country, then I have achieved my mission technically, right? So his initial mission, like you said, like I said, I had a hard time going in between like the Zhao mindset and the Qin mindset. He did that complete transformation at the end where he just went like, yes, this guy is going to be the emperor of this country, this king, and if I have to die for it, I have to die. And he fulfills his mission that way, in a different way. He wasn't intending it to be that way, but technically he did fulfill it. So
Yeah, I think when sacrifices happens in movies, a lot of people are like, "Whoa!" Like I remember when the sacrifice happened, for example, in Endgame between Black Widow and Hawkeye. I remember I was chatting with a friend afterwards, and he was like, "Oh, that was so hard. Like I wouldn't know what to do." So I know I would jump right away, because I'd rather have the other person have a better life than me for myself, for example, because I wouldn't be able to live with the thought that he whatever. I said, so it's not really that complicated. And then he was like, well, but really just think about it. If you put yourself in someone else's shoes, I said, if you do that, the answer is not really that complicated unless you're very selfish, which comes back to this movie.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. That's a really good point. And it kind of ties back in. You talking about that made me think of something. We talk about the relationship between Snow and Broken Sword, and he has to prove to her that he loves her by basically sacrificing himself to her own hand. That reminds me of what you said about Black Widow and stuff from Endgame and Infinity War or whatever it was. Just what is love? That's the point, right? What is love? And I think that's a really strong point in this movie too. What really is love? Is love sacrificing yourself, like you said, to let somebody else have a better life? And I think if you apply that to even relationships, like even if you're alive, I mean, I think it's from a Tao Te Ching. I think maybe even Lao Tzu said it. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he said something like, "You must love in such a way that the other person feels free." So how do you do that? How do you love in such a way that the other person feels free? And in that instance, when you're talking about Black Widow, she realizes, like, I love my friends so much that if the only way they're going to be free or feel free is if I do this to allow them to live and be free, I have to do it by sacrificing themselves. But it's also a mental thing too and an emotional thing. You have to sacrifice yourself mentally and emotionally in a relationship to let the other person feel free. Sometimes when people get into relationships or people get into whatever, they want to control people. And I think that's another part of this movie. That whole thing with Zhao, with the red scene where it's the exaggerated version, Broken Sword and the way they were exaggerated, and Snow, the way they were exaggerated, and Moon, the way they were exaggerated in that scene was they were trying to control how Jet Li handled the situation, his character. They wouldn't let him do it on his own and be free to make his own decision because they were challenging him. And that's why Snow ends up killing Broken Sword, because she doesn't allow him to be free. He has to free himself. The only way he does it is by sacrificing himself to her sword. Because she's trying to control his decision. She's trying to say, no, you're with the king, you have to die. Even though deep down inside she's like, he'll just block it. He's not going to die. But she was trying to influence and control his decision, so he was basically like, no more fighting, no more control. Just end it here. Set me free. If you love me and I love you, if I have to die for you to understand that, then that's how it has to be. Same kind of principle, Lao Tzu. Live in such a way the other person feels free.
Yeah, it's also when I think when they are dressed in blue, dressed in blue, where she basically stabs him because they were supposed to fight Jet Li's character, and he's like, "Why did you do that?" Well, because you have to live. It's in the sense like, Moon is about to come over, like, that girl is still young, you can still have a life with her, whereas I am old, I cannot have or give life to someone else, therefore it's better if I go. But it's also a bit about sacrifice.
Yeah, and it went back and forth between the characters and the way it was depicted. That's a really good point. Like, the same way, though, right? That's really the definition of love, right? Letting the other person be free, but also, even if you have to love them from a distance, even if you're not there for them, even if you're not there, still love them. right?
Like that. Also, constantly with the swords, they cannot be separated because they're meant to be together.
Exactly. That's a good point too.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
wasn't ready at the time. I was like, fuck this
he
shit.
he appreciated it later on, Sana. I mean, I
Like
always
me.
liked that. Like I always did like that. I always thought it was fascinating. I was fascinated by it all the time. So can't spell assassin without ass twice. Deadpool Marvel versus Capcom. That's true though. You can't. There actually are two asses in assassin.
I can't unsee it now. It's a good way to
Assassin.
memorize how to spell them.
Assassin.
Just like
Good point. Luke.
banana. I think of Gwen Stefani. Banana. Shit is bananas.
That's bananas, man. No, but there's a million things we could say about this movie. I mean, the way it's shot too, like some of the scenes where they pan out. Like one scene that I love is the very beginning of the movie where like Jet Li is walking up the steps to go into the king's like palace, and they have that really wide shot of him just walking up the scenes. It makes the movie feel like it's huge. Like it makes you feel like you're in China, you know? And
China is huge.
yeah. Or the scene where like she leaves Broken Sword and she's walking through the desert to go to that white horse. That scene, and it like pans
Everything
out.
was just beautiful. What I also really like was at the when he's sitting at the king, how the king know he's bullshitting because the wind is showing the candles they're pointing in a certain direction. He's like, but you're bullshitting, and then the candle lights go another way. But you're uncertain now. I like it
exactly.
too.
Yeah, he's like you said earlier, he's having that mental struggle in his head, and then to showcase that struggle, it's the candle light, right? Which is awesome.
Ciao.
What's up, G-Man?
The Godfather's in the house.
The Godfather. Gwen references the shit. Bananas.
Banana.
I love it. Yeah, but
So now I'm also Dana.
Dana, banana, fofana. I think you meant Santa, banana, fofana,
Sandy.
fetai, fofana, Santa. Yeah.
Sanitation.
Sanimation.
Yeah, there's one person. I mean, everybody loves this person online apparently, but he always says Sanimation05. Like, what? Sanimation. Yeah.
But yeah, watching this again was awesome. It's been a while for me too. I think you said it was like 8 years. I think I rewatched it. I want to say probably 4 years ago or so. But I couldn't really remember a lot of it. What did you think at the end when they shot the arrows to execute Jet Li and you didn't see him? It was just like a
damn.
What did that mean to you? Like what kind of connotation did that mean to you when you saw that? Did it strike anything with you? Did you think anything of it? What did it mean? Like in your head, what was your perception of that? Like what does that mean to you?
At first I thought it's almost like he was a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
Like he wasn't really there to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
You probably think of something else.
No, I'm asking you. I mean, is there anything else about that?
It was in the shape of a dick. Oh, no, but I really, like he took full force, like he was like surrendered, like, okay, it's okay. Just like Black Widow says, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
He basically died a hero, I guess.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's kind of what I got from it too. But I think for me, it kind of echoes back to what I said about the Black Obi and like being secretive and not knowing who he is. Just think about it. Like at the end, there's a silhouette of the guy and there's arrows and you don't see his body, right? They don't show it until they're like pretty much having the funeral proceeding at the end where he has the red like cloak over his body, right? I think the whole point of that is kind of like his name was nameless, right? This is a guy that nobody knew about. King never heard of him before. These three assassins never heard of him before. But somehow, this person who had no name, nobody knew where he's from, nobody knew who he was, and really you don't. He says he's from one place, but you don't know that. You don't know where, what region. You have no idea.
The man
So
from nowhere.
yeah, sort of. Sort of the
Yeah.
same connotation. Like he's just some guy who believed in a certain cause, and then he was swayed to do the right thing, quote unquote. But because of his actions, he was a hero. He was somebody who was able to convince three of the most powerful assassins in these kingdoms to join with him to do something to execute the king, but then sway their mentalities too to help unify China. And it really goes to the thing that said, like, what was it, all under heaven or our
Yeah, all
land?
under heaven.
Yeah, whichever one you look at. Pretty much anybody can be a hero is also the thing. You can be a nobody, you can have no name, but as long as you're willing to help people and unite people and stand your ground and help people out for the common good, you're a hero, right?
And then Tina Turner would come in. We don't need another hero.
Tina Turner, the hellacious hero Joe. I'm a hero. It's my name.
F.
Say my name, say my name.
But
The
what
hero.
I think personally for me, why I really appreciate this movie now, because over the years I really developed a love for photography, and I've shown you a few pictures that I've taken. So I really like those wide range shots where there's colors visible and just really like minimalistic, but the target is inside. So I really look at it in a whole different way now. I'm like, God damn it, I would love to take pictures there.
A funny thing,
Everything.
a funny thing about that too is the director, Zhang Yimou. He struggled like his whole life, and he was like really working these shitty jobs and stuff. And then eventually, he saved up enough money to buy a camera and start taking pictures. I think I read somewhere he was like selling his blood, like his own blood, to get money for a camera. And like some of those pictures and those wide angle shots remind me of just some guy with a camera taking like a panoramic shot, and it really looked that way, but it was like alive. Like the picture was actually alive and moving. And I thought that was really awesome. Like you said, it was super cool. So
It really was, and especially with the traditional music, it kept it all zen in a way. If that's how the good way to word this.
it kept it all zen. No, this is a very like philosophical and deep movie. It's kind of like um it's almost really ambiguous to a certain extent, where I feel like some of the past streams we've done have been pretty straightforward. Like you get closure at the end. This one, you you get closure sort of, but it's kind of like you're still thinking about it. You're like, like you said, is Jet Li really a ghost? Was he even actually there? Was this all in the king's head? Was this like a BS story? Was it actually a story that somebody was telling the king? Was Jet Li even really there? Like,
Or was it
what
just the
actually
song of the old man?
was it? Just a song of the old man? Was it just, remember when at the beginning when they're bringing Jet Li in the carriage and he runs up to the prime minister and tells him? Or maybe was it just a story from somebody who was going to tell them that the assassins had been vanquished? You don't know that. You don't really know.
As you said before, stories being told like by different people, it always turns out to be different.
So I think that's a really cool thing that the director did with this. I mean, it was a really neat thing to actually put you in this situation. Like you were actually reliving this story that somebody was telling, like to make it almost believe that you were telling the story in your own head. It's a pretty
It
powerful
would have
thing.
looked better. No.
Yeah. It would have looked amazing. Ah, yeah. Thanks, Louis. Appreciate it, bro.
Oh.
The Emperor's Assassin. I think I watched that when I was a kid. It's been a
Speaking
long
of,
time though. I barely remember it. Thanks for the suggestion though, G-Man. Been a while. Been a while.
ass in.
Assassin, yes, as Louis informed us of how to spell it. Right?
Grazie.
Yeah. But Yeah, I mean, anything else about Hero Sauna that you can think of up top of your head besides it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, there's a lot of meaning behind it, it's really deeply philosophical and really artsy
Let me
and
just check my notes while you entertain the people with striptease or something. I don't know.
yeah. What's in those notes? Oh,
There's
kind
a lot.
spill the beans, baby.
No, we already talked about. Uh, we talked about those scenes already.
Yeah. Um, the thing about this movie is like Sonic said, I mean, it's pretty much one big art homage to Chinese culture. You get the music, you get the calligraphy, you get the swordplay, you get martial arts, you get the colors, you get the philosophies of like Confucianism and Taoism and stuff in this. I mean, it's really really powerful stuff. It's pretty much I told someone this before we started the stream. It's like you're watching almost like a poem sort of unfold. It's like you're reading a poem, but you're like watching it instead of reading it. Like you're just watching the stuff play out on the screen, as opposed to reading it in a book or something like that. So I
Yeah,
think
the
that's
only thing I can add is when the end credits begin, there is this poem, whatever, by Niccolo Machiavelli from The Prince and I cannot even write my own handwriting after that. But it was like it was like you have the prince and the king, and but the prince does this, but this is what the king did. If you don't know it.
yeah, Niccolo Machiavelli. I know that. I know the Prince. I don't know the poem, but I mean, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, the Prince. I mean, and that story by Niccolo Machiavelli was a satire on basically the kings and stuff during the Renaissance times, because Machiavelli was kind of like this political figure, and then you had like in Renaissance Italy, you had like the families kind of like what's the name of the family? They had like banks and stuff. It's like it's not ringing any bells, but they had like banks and stuff, and they would basically pay off politicians and kings and royalty. So it was kind of like the first mafia, really. Like the first Italian mafia was owned by these people who had these banks. So Machiavelli's critique with the prince and stuff was kind of like royalty is supposed to be suppressing this stuff, but they're not doing a good job. Like they're intertwined with all this stuff, and it's like a big conspiracy. We need a king or a ruler or a politician, quote unquote, who's going to stand up for the people and not basically put this illusory sheet over the society to make them feel like they're safe when in actuality they're not, and there's people behind the scenes pulling strings. It's kind of like that too. It's really similar to this, but Machiavelli, another family. It's not related to. I can't, for whatever reason, I can't think of the name of that. The people who own the banks in Florence, but it kind of relates.
Rothschild, Rockefeller, those guys, or
No, in Renaissance Italy, the name of the people who own the banks. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Right?
pepperoni pizza.
But it's kind of like the Borgias. That whole like, if you ever heard of the Borgias, they were from Spain, but one of the cardinals who was from Spain became the Pope of Rome, and he was a really corrupt official who used bribes and all kinds of stuff to raise to power to basically be almost like it was almost like the cardinals and the Pope was like a mafia ring. Like he actually paid off like people who were supposed to be in the church and all that kind of stuff, and were supposed to be helping people to basically murder people and kill people and eliminate people. So they were kind of like hired assassins who were actually like clergymen. So it's kind of like that's what Machiavelli's talking about in that respect.
And not much has changed since then.
No, it hasn't. No, you're right. I mean, corruption is still very much alive and well, right? But that's the thing he tried to bring to light. Like a lot of this stuff is behind the scenes, and you don't see it because we talked about this in previous streams. A lot of people on the surface kind of just see things for face value. They don't want to explore it and try to understand it. Like if somebody says something, like we said this the other day with the Ghost in the Shell stream, if you read it on your cell phone or you see it on the internet now or you see it on Facebook or social media or something, people just assume that it's fact without really delving into what it's really about, And it's not like the people who are writing the news or politicians or anything are helping us try to understand it. They're like, oh, yeah, it is, So you take their word for it, like, oh, yeah, he knows what he's talking about. Really, it's like, Man, maybe not. Maybe I should do some research. But yeah,
So for anyone who hasn't seen my Instagram post, I said, tune in because he knows his shit. It's true. I just dropped the name of the guy, Machiavelli, and the Prince poem, whatever, and he drops knowledge. So there you go. It's true.
G-Man says, yeah, they still are fucking. Hey, brother, I'm with you,
Right?
man. I'm with you. I'm with you. Yep. Yep. Trying to control us all. That's right, brother. No, that's a really good point. And to tie that back into this movie, I think that's kind of what the assassins wanted. They didn't want to be controlled by this Qin dynasty because they wanted to be free and be sovereign of this empire. But then when they realized at the end that this guy was actually, to a certain extent, trying to do the right thing, and like even so in my head here thinking, like, was he really trying to do the right thing? By uniting China as one people, I get that and I understand it and I appreciate it, but you also in your head have to think about like Zhao is its own province. Qin was its own province. Yan was its own province. Wei was its own province. Qi was its own province. Han was its own province. Chu was its own province. Those are the 7 warring states. So by eliminating Wei or Chu or Qi or Yan or Zhao, are you eliminating an entire kind of people because you want unification? Maybe. Maybe. So that whole that all that stuff ties into nationalism and social identity and all that kind of stuff. I mean, my heritage is Italian and I've done research on Italy too, and if you look at Italy before it became unified as Italy, there were people, I mean, even to this day, I mean, sure Sonic could tell you, there are people over there who identify as Roman. There are people who identify as Venetian. There's people who identify as Florentine. Some people don't even call themselves Italians, quote unquote, because they believe in the actual province over the state. So what really identifies your culture, right?
Because Sicilians are Sicilians, they're not Italians.
Exactly.
But then there's also still the hate going on between North and South, because the North hate all the quote-unquote peasants from...
There you
Apparently
go.
it's all corrupt. Well, all the corruption has happened in the North with all the media and all the stuff. So, boop.
There's my point exactly. So at the end of the day, this movie, although it does have a really good point and a really strong moral that we're all people under heaven, this is our land, this is our country. Basically, the whole moral of the story is, and this is my opinion, Son, if you agree, tell me, the moral of the story is make love, not war, right? Because if you're warring, you're going to kill people just to unify borders. You're still killing people at the end of the day. Let people be people. Let them have their own provinces and call it China. And just say this is the Qin sector, this is the Zhao sector, this is the Yan sector, this is the Wei sector, the Qi sector, the Han sector, the Chu sector. It doesn't need to be all one thing, right? And Son and I have talked about this. Yeah, and you and I have talked about this before too. Like over in Europe, it's a beautiful thing because there's a lot of places over there that still have the kind of historical, like you said, you can go 15 or 20 minutes and be in a completely different country. Over here in the States, it's really kind of more of the same. You can go somewhere and see a Walmart or a Walgreens or all these chains, and it's kind of like the mom and pop places that used to be around here that were distinct to each individual city or town or state are kind of like dying off because everything's chain, because it's all business. And that's what I think G-Man's trying to say that too, like, look, let us have our own little bit of diversity here. We don't need to be the same. That's what he's trying to say. Everybody's different, right?
No, I mean, Europe is cute with all the architecture and all that stuff, but if you really think about it, the way Europe is really kissing American ass is kind of scary.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with you. I've told you this many times before. I'm thankful for what I have in this life, and I'm glad to be here. But at the same time, I can't sit here and bullshit and say I agree with everything that my country's doing.
Yeah, because if you take it back to like World War II, of course, there were a lot of fucked up things that were happening. But when the shit happened between Japan and America was like, we declare war upon Japan, and all the people, there was like this thing going on, this agreement. I cannot think of the word right now. Also with Europe. So when America declares the war, Europe, the few countries that were part of it, they also had to declare war. And with the whole colonial thing going on in Asia, basically it was like sending your own death sentence. Like the Netherlands also had to declare war to Japan, whereas all the people in Indonesia, the Dutch ones, they were like, okay, now what? Because we were trading with Japan for over like what 300 years, and suddenly, let's become comfort women.
Yeah, that was like the United Nations and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. If somebody declares war, it would later become that. It was developed like after the war, but that was like the precursor to it. If somebody declares war, if the United States or whomever is part of this treaty or part of this union or part of this alliance, if you declare war, that means the people involved in this as well have to support you in it.
So, the same thing the thing that happened 2 days ago. The date was 2 days ago, and then 19 years ago, when that shit was happening. I remember I was like feeling like all these energy, like America's like, oh, it's war, and I was like, oh shit is going down because we all have to like.
Yeah, listen, I don't want to like sit here and say, like I said, that anybody's perfect, but I would. Sanne and I will say this all. Yeah, Sanne and I will say this all the time. Make sure you guys, if you're listening, you're rewatching this stream, like, please investigate what you're like interested in, and don't take anything for face value. I've learned that, from my experiences. Like I said, I studied history in college. I'm very passionate about the subject, and I've learned from studying that history repeats itself, and if you want to really understand what happens, go back and look at some stuff and do some research and dive into some things, because it will really, really, really give you, I'm not saying it's going to give you the exact answer, but it's going to give you a magnifying glass to look at the stuff a lot closer than what you may have seen on the surface, is all I'm trying to say. And then you can make better judgments because you've done your research and you have more than one opinion about what it's about. You have multiple opinions about what it's about. You have multiple facts that actually happen that you can relate to the subject matter at hand. And that's kind of, I want to tie that back into CinemAsian, because that's what we're trying to do here. Like with these streams, and I said this before at the beginning, Sanne and I really, really, really focus on these movies, and we focus on the actors, and we focus on the action sequences, and we focus on the dialogue, and we literally listen to every word they say and every action they do and everything, because we kind of compared this yesterday when we were talking. It's almost like we're studying for exams here to do these streams. We come in here like, okay, it's test time. When 4 o'clock comes, it's time to start the test, right? Like, and we're kind of,
but in a good way.
Yeah,
not
it's a
in a
refreshing
torturous
thing.
way.
We're kind of quizzing each other. This isn't a objective stream. We're not here to try to get all these checkpoints about how much stuff we know about something. It's subjective. No. We're giving our opinions about the things that we love and the things that we just looked at or studied or, are passionate about getting more into. And that's the whole point of it,
Yeah, like know a lot of shit about that side, and I know shit about that side, and that it comes together when pepperoni.
Absolutely. Yeah, G-Man. Right on, bro. Shame. Some of the stuff that happens in war, man, is absolutely, I mean, it's inhumane, to say the least. It's stuff that humans shouldn't be doing to each other. And it's almost like animals in the wild. I mean, it really is. And you kind of, when you see that in war, it's like people revert to their most animalistic instincts. And it's really a survival thing. But some of this stuff is even beyond that. It's just cruelty. It's cruelty.
What I am kind of, I don't know, like pissed off about is that in high school we learned about World War II, right? And we learned about what happened to all the Jewish people, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But and that the Germans are the bad guy. But why do we never learn about all the experiments that they did? Well, what was it for? I mean, it applies to today. I'm pretty fucking sure about that.
Listen, I'm going to be honest with you, Sanne, okay? I have an entire library back here of books on the occult roots of Nazism and all that stuff. Not because I'm a Nazi or anything, but because I've studied it, And listen, when I was in college, I took a lot of different history classes because, like I said, I wanted to be a sponge and just soak up as much information as I can. I took Eastern history classes on China and Japan. I took history classes on World War II and, like you just mentioned, the Third Reich and that kind of stuff, because I wanted to understand why people did those things. When I was in grad school, actually, the first paper I ever wrote for grad school was about the experimentation on that kind of stuff. But the thing is, it all boils down to this very, very simple thing, okay? And there are a lot of complexities and there are a lot of different things about it. At the end of the day, it kind of goes back to what we're talking about right here, okay? People will influence you to do something. And a lot of people don't dive deep into what's really going on. Normal people, let's just say, for instance, the Third Reich, when they did the stuff that they did, the really shitty, bad stuff, right? And they told people that was true, the subliminal messaging, the propaganda, all that kind of stuff is going to influence certain people. I'm not saying all people did, because there were people who did save people, you know. There were people who did try to stop it from happening. But if the majority, here it is, the saying goes, majority rules, right? If the majority of the people are around and they're doing this kind of stuff, the majority of the stuff that's going to happen is the bad shit. Even if the minority does save some people, which is awesome because they did, right? The only way in that instance of what happened in World War II and all that stuff with the concentration camps and all that, the only way that got stopped was because other people didn't want that shit to happen, and they overthrew the majority.
Yeah, because it's kind of weird because there are just a few pictures where you see Mr. H himself, so to say, with some very rich, influential Jewish people behind him. You're like, eh.
Oh, yeah. Well, think about it this way. I'm going to give
for another episode.
Yeah, I was going to say, one more fact in regards to that before we continue with Hero here for a second. Here's what happened, okay?
Are we allowed to come back by YouTube?
Yeah. Did you ever hear about the story it's called Night of the Long Knives? Did you ever hear about that? That's what Adolf Hitler did. Night of the Long Knives there were two different factions in Nazi Germany, okay? There was the SA and the SS. What happened was the SA was more of a political thing, and the SS was like the soldiers, the caretakers, the exterminators, the ones who had the philosophy of the Aryan and all that kind of stuff. So, the Night of the Long Knives, what that was Hitler himself organized this. He got members of the SS to actually assassinate every single member of his own party in the SA and kill them because they didn't completely agree with the ideology that he had. So even though, and get this, here's a little fun fact too. Hitler's last name is actually Schicklgruber, and he's actually a quarter Jewish. I don't know if you knew that or not. But yeah, so he's basically a hypocrite. He was doing all this stuff just because. But people believed him because he gave off the notion and the opinion that he really was this guy who had all this. He fought in World War I and he got discharged because he got injured. He was never
Unless
really
he was
hero.
the doll of and someone else was the puppeteer, or however you say it.
Heinrich Himmler was the puppeteer, but he was the right hand man, and he was pretty much in control of all the stuff. You know, but
I think G-Man is
Yeah.
firing up.
he is. I was just gonna say this, G-Man. He's absolutely right. That's exactly what he was. He couldn't get into art school, so if you actually read anything about this guy, when he tried to create the Third Reich, he tried to model it after ancient Roman Greece because he wanted it to be artsy and all lavish with marble pillars and all this kind of stuff. He was trying to recreate a classical time for a modern era based on artistic designs.
Speaking of art, I also find it very weird that, there are a lot of great artists coming from Italy and also from the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
Girl with pearl earring, all that jazz. Yet it's all scattered all over the world, but it's not in the country of its origin.
Well, here's the thing. I just kind of want to make a quick comment on that. Over here in America, I'm not trying to say anything, but the thing with us is none of us over here are truly Native Americans. Native Americans, like the Europeans came over here and like pretty much destroyed all of them with either illness or warfare. So look, like I just mentioned earlier in the stream, look at me. I'm half Italian, and then my mom is like a bunch of different things all mixed. I mean, so like technically I'm European, but I was born in America. So I'm technically a Native American now in the present day, but my ancestry is European. So all that stuff got spread over here. Like I'm American, but I have a bunch of Japanese art in my house. I have a bunch of Greek stuff. I have a statue of Dionysus over on my dresser, you know. It's not because I mean, I have a little Greek in me too, but it's because
Malaka.
all that stuff gets disseminated. So
I'm really curious if we could now talk to the people from like over 100 years ago that came over to America, be like, this is what the future looked like. Do you still think it's the land of opportunity, the land of dreams?
I agree with you. I think it's all. I think it was because it was new, but just like everything else, here's another thing. Over here in America, this country is not even 300 years old yet. You guys over in Europe have a rich, rich, rich history that's thousands and thousands of years old. We don't. Right? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The Crusades was about Christianity. It was about defeating people who weren't going to be Christian, right? And taking over them that way, using religion as the crux instead of a political party. It's a similar kind of thing. You're right.
Yeah, nothing has changed. It still happens to this day.
Well, that's a good example that G-Man brought up because really everything is a crusade when it comes to war. It all depends on what it's about, though. The Crusades in name are about religion, Christianity versus Islam. However, look at Vietnam. That was a crusade, but it was about communism versus democracy, or Korea, or the Cold War. Same thing with World War II, right? Same kind of thing. It was about, one ideology versus another. That's really what it boils down to at the end of the day. My ideology versus your ideology.
Yeah, just like with World War II with Japan, the purification of Asia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But
it all ties to a hero.
you know what? In essence, though, it does because we're talking about wars in our own lifetime. And like I said at the beginning of the stream, this period in China where this movie is based is called the Warring States period. Right? It's a bunch of different ideologies from those 7 provinces that I've named a couple times who are trying to figure out who is the strongest, the most elite, who has the best ideology. But really what it boils down to at the end of the day is what group of people are willing to fight the hardest to defeat all the others. I mean, that's pretty much it. You don't get dynasties by, you can, making peace treaties. You can do that. But at the same time, that other person has to accept your proposal. And if they don't, there's a rebellion, there's a revolution, there's a war. My philosophy is our world right now is in a state of perpetual war. It always will be forever until somehow we can reach world peace. Because since the introduction of private property and everybody having their own stuff, that's really all it is. And really every day is a struggle and every day is a war for people, When you go to a job, your employer has to pay you a wage. You have to go work to earn the wage. You don't just get money handed to you. Back in the day, you could. Back in the day, if you were a king or a lord or something like that, you had servants or serfs coming up to you, handing you money for tilling your land for you. You didn't have to do it. Yes, here's your royalty checks. And that's kind of what the mafia is. But now, because it's the land of the free, the home of the brave, everybody's equal, everybody has to work for a living, the mafia is labeled as criminals. But back in the day, kings and queens and royalty, they were technically sort of like criminals. They were making people slaves to get money. That's what people do. Right? This is Sparta. Louie. Louie always coming in clutch with those one-liners. Love you, buddy. Perfect line. This is Sparta. Another But another good example of this, an entire empire of Persia trying to take over Lacedaemon, which is also known as Sparta, right? Yeah, you got 300 guys standing up for what they believed in. Their ideology versus the Persian ideology.
Oh, when New Amsterdam became New York.
There you go.
When Breukelen became Brooklyn. When Haarlem became Harlem. When Bredeweg became Broadway. And so forth.
All kinds of name changes so everybody can speak the same language and understand one another. And in a way, that's a good thing. But at the same time, it also takes away, like I mentioned earlier, the cultural diversity and differences between cultures. Because if everything's the same, then how do you understand when somebody's different? I studied ancient Greek in college as a language. Nobody speaks ancient Greek anymore. Even modern day Greek, like the language, is not anywhere near what ancient Greek used to be. A dead language. Latin's a dead language. But people, can you believe that? People used to speak Latin all over the place because that was the language of the Roman Empire, probably the biggest empire ever in the world. But nobody speaks it anymore.
Here's the thing that I always find fucking strange. You think of Latin, it originates from, let's say, Italy, right? Though they never say, or they're never being called Latin people. Yeah, you have all these Spanish Latin people. That's Latin people, blah, blah, blah. Okay, of course. I guess French also comes from Latin, but they don't call themselves Latin. But, I always find it weird that Italians, they don't get to be called, like Latinos.
Yeah, isn't it funny too
that...
No. It's funny too because think about the word Italian. Latin is actually in Italia. I mean, it's in there. Latia, Italia. It's in there. It's
Italiano.
Exactly. Latino is right in it with an I. So no, I agree with you. It's just what happens is people start having these borders and separating themselves from other people, and they have to distinguish themselves as a certain group. But that's kind of like goes on the opposite of what we're saying about diversity, because now they're distinguishing themselves in a way where it makes you sometimes being one and identifying as a certain person separates you, but it also unites you depending on what it is. So tie it back into Hero. That's the whole point of the movie. Who's right and who's wrong? Would it have been better to have all these different provinces be their own distinct entities, or would it have been better to create the Qin dynasty and then later the Han dynasty and then later, down the road, the Tang dynasty and all that stuff? Who's to say? It all depends on who has the weapons, the guns, the most power, the best philosophy that the majority, like I said, of people are going to believe in. Right? So.
Spitting knowledge.
This is Sanne. Then Sanne kicks the messenger down the well. Ah!
By farting.
Acid extortion. Yeah, I can see that, definitely. I mean, absolutely. Namaste. G-Man. Rocky 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth with the Roman numerals. That's the same with me, Louis, but it was the Super Bowl. Super Bowl numbers. The Roman numbers for American football. Glad to have you here, G-Man. Thanks for popping in, man. Everybody in the chat, we really appreciate you. I know we kind of went off on a tangent there the last 15 or 20 minutes. But like Sanne and I always like to do, we kind of like to, associate stuff in this movie to everyday life and kind of compare and contrast, the real world right now with this kind of movie. And that's the beauty of it. And I say this in a lot of my individual, videos I post. And I just did one the other day about like an unboxing of a Bruce Lee figure I did. And at the end of that, I said, never forget that you can apply a lot of stuff that's imaginary to reality, and it'll help you think critically. And I believe in that. I mean, this movie, technically, Hero, is based on a historical account of an assassination on this king of Qin, right? But it's very romanticized, and there's a fantasy element to it. However, you can see it in the movie how There's a fantastical version of what actually happened, a more realistic version, and then the purest realistic version. And that goes back and relates to everything we're talking about. Don't take stuff at face value, because a lot of that stuff is fantastical. A lot of that stuff is make believe. You have to question it, right? There's a saying when I was a teacher and I taught community college, and I always told my students this. I said, there's no such thing as a dumb question. You should always question something. If you don't understand it, please raise your hand and ask me, because if you sit there in silence and just pretend that you know what's going on, you really don't. And that's what separates the lions from the sheep, in my opinion. If you're a sheep, you're going to go along with the rest of the sheep and just, wade through whatever. But if you actually have a mouthpiece and you have a voice and you want to talk about it and actually get an understanding, in a way, it's almost like challenging me. And I always told my students, challenge me, because I want you to be able to express yourself in a positive way so you understand yourself. But not only am I teaching you something, when you question me and ask me questions and you have a discourse with me, you're teaching me something about you, about your demeanor, about yourself, about how vested you are in the subject matter. Like that's important,
Again,
So,
spitting knowledge. Sub to his channel, and you might actually, well, for sure, you'll learn something if you're open for it.
no, but Sanne and I talked about this earlier, and she knows this, and I say this all the time. If it wasn't for Sanne and some of the stuff that she's introduced me to, I don't even know if we'd be doing these streams, or I would get to share all this stuff that her and I talk about with you guys, right? And I know she's giving me kudos up here and saying I have all this knowledge, and I do. I'm interested in a lot of stuff, but let me tell you something about Sanne. Or over here, where's she at? Over here? Oh, where's my camera at? Oh, right there. Here, Sanne. Yeah, you know a lot of stuff too. So yeah, give yourself a pat on the back and give yourself credit too, because Sanne has showed me stuff with these streams and stuff we've talked about that I didn't even know about, like Yes, Madam and that kind of stuff, and that movie that we did with Takashi Miike with the killers. I never even knew that movie existed. Like, stuff like that is awesome to me, but that's the point of that thing I just talked about. She showed me something by just having a discourse and asking me questions about things that I didn't even know about, that I learned. And we're teaching each other things here, and we're learning from each other. And we hope that with these CinemAsian streams that we're giving you guys that same opportunity. And I love that you guys are active in the chat, because it really does let me express myself, and I'm sure Sanne can say the same thing. It really lets us think about things and give us topics to talk about and bounce more ideas off of each other. So
yeah, I'm really
appreciate
I'm
it.
really excited for these streams, because I get the opportunity to be myself, like geek out and with someone understanding it, because a lot of people just don't fucking get the fuck I'm talking about.
Yeah, but like I said, I appreciate you too, Sanne. Anything else about Hero? I know we went off on a tangent there for a little bit. Is there anything else you want to add? I know we kind of exhausted it, but hey, listen, there's no harm in beating a dead horse if we're passionate about it, like G-Man said. Passion for life and knowledge. So anything else about Hero you want to add? Or anything you can relate it to? Anything you can relate it to in your own life, or another movie, or another art form, or another, anything at all?
Well, there's a lot of things that can be said, but most of all, go watch the movie, and thank you for doing this with me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Like I said, my pleasure. Thank you for the same. Guys, anything else in the chat? I'm gonna stay on here for about 5 more minutes, and I think we're gonna cut the stream off. We kind of exhausted all the stuff with Hero, and I'm sorry if it was a little repetitive, but sometimes I think Sanne can agree with me that we like to say the same thing over and over again so we can remember it, because we're getting old, right? So,
Speak for yourself, princess.
oh, sorry, yeah. I'm getting old. Sorry, Sanne. You're young. I forgot. You're only gonna be what,
I'm a young
23?
queen.
You're gonna be
18.
23 in a couple months. 18. That's right.
18.
That's right. Sanne's gonna be 18. Gee, man, I appreciate you, bro. Thank you for all these comments, man. It means a lot.
Yeah, G-Man is awesome. Like, I know that this conversation is just right up his alley, because when I spoke with him backstage when I was joining his stream, like, but also not during those times, but also, with just with messages on Instagram, like, you can literally just talk anything what was I going to say? You could talk about anything with him, and he understands it. And allegation. Yeah, I like to keep my skin porcelain white. Though I think I got a bit of a color, which kind of confuses
Yeah, guys,
me.
make sure if you guys haven't subbed each other up in the chat there that you guys are doing that. And
Yeah, sub up for sure to Loey, because I
yeah,
know a lot of people would just sub up to his channel now because he gives away comics. All the crows and the birds, they will fly over to his channel like, oh, free comics, we love you, Loey. But in reality, this guy is the most fucking sincere, friendliest, awesome dude. And before the stream started, Joe was singing, I got 5 comics.
I got 5 comics, buddy. That is a catchy tune. It's been in my head for like 3 weeks. Not 4 or 3. I got 5 comics, bro. Like, you should record that. Like, I'm not trying to be a smartass or anything. Like, it's really catchy. Like, seriously, like,
It is.
I was thinking about it the other day. Like, I was looking at my comics and I was like singing it. It's catchy, bro.
That's true, Loey. Because I know that you'll get a shitload of subs for just for the the freeloaders, but in reality, you're a fucking awesome guy. You're very supportive and very friendly, and
You're the man,
a,
Louis.
a virtual hug.
Virtual hug, bro. Yeah, Louis is a good
And a
dude.
virtual hug
G-Man.
for Rob and his queen.
G-Man's a good dude too. You guys should definitely talk to each other. You guys will be good friends. I'm sure of it.
Mm-hmm.
Sanne. Ooh.
Oh. Stop flirting, Loey.
You,
Stop the
Louis.
horns.
You. All right, guys. Well, that was our stream on Hero. Sanne, thanks again. Always a pleasure. Next week, Sanne, what are we doing? Are we going to be doing stuff next week on what's the movie we're doing on Saturday?
If we don't get flagged for this stuff that we just talked about, conspiracy confirmed. Yeah, next week we will talk about one of my favorite movies ever that really got me into martial arts movies even more. Police Story.
Yes.
The amazing Jackie Chan.
Yes. This is Sanne. This is Sanne for sure. It'll definitely be Sanne next Saturday with Police Story. This is Sanne. Great choice, Sanne. And then Sunday, what's going to happen is, thanks, Sean. Sunday, if we don't get flagged for this hero stream, I'll probably just do another hero stream on Sunday. We'll do Kung Fu Hustle, I think, on my channel next week. Really funny movie. Sanne kind of inspired me to rewatch it and get into it again with Yes Madam, because those characters in there just made me laugh my ass off. Those 3 thieves, so it reminded me of this a lot, and I was like, we got to do Kung Fu Hustle. So,
you gotta get some humor in life.
Absolutely. Thanks, G-Man. Thanks for stopping in, bro. I really appreciate it, man. And Sean is excited about next week. Well, we will see you guys next week, same time on Sanne's channel on Saturday, 4 p.m. EST, 10 p.m. Euro, and then the next day on Sunday, same time on my channel. And like I said, Sanne's going to be doing Police Story with Jackie Chan, and I'm going to be doing Steven Cho's Kung Fu Hustle on Sunday. So hopefully we'll see you guys there. Take care of yourselves. Appreciate you all. You're good people. Keep doing what you're doing, and always do you, right? See you guys next time.
Thank you all for tuning in.
Later.